The night began with silence, but above that silence an invisible storm was forming. Across Ukraine's darkened skies, 31 drones rose like a wave of mechanical ghosts, their engines whispering a language only warfare could understand. Each drone carried not only explosives but intent, crafted precision, guided by data, satellite feeds, and human determination. What was once a distant dream of high-tech warfare was now a reality unfolding in the air between Kyiv and Moscow. The swarm moved with eerie unity, a living organism of circuitry and steel. This was not a random attack, it was a message written in the smoke trails of every drone that crossed the border. The mission was meticulously planned. Ukraine's military intelligence had been monitoring Russian radar blind spots for weeks, mapping every weakness in their defense network. The drones were not launched from a single site but from multiple hidden bases, spread across forests, abandoned fields, and underground hangars. Their routes were pre-programmed to weave through radar shadows, exploiting the gaps that even Russia's advanced S-400 systems could not cover. It was a display of strategy that fused human brilliance with machine precision. Ukraine understood that in modern warfare, invisibility is more powerful than armor, and timing is deadlier than firepower. As the drones crossed into Russian airspace, early detection systems flickered with confusion. Operators inside command bunkers watched blips appear on their screens, multiply and then vanish. The swarm had split into hundreds of micro-formations, each taking a unique path to its designated target. Some headed toward fuel depots near Moscow, others toward communication centers and air bases. Within minutes, the first explosions erupted in synchronized chaos. Flames painted the sky red as secondary blasts followed, triggered by fuel ignitions and ammunition stockpiles. The air defenses, overwhelmed by sheer numbers, fired wildly into the night, but the drones kept coming, unstoppable, coordinated, relentless. This was not the war Russia expected. For years, Moscow had relied on massive arsenals and intimidation, believing brute force could crush innovation. But on this night, power shifted. Ukraine showed that small, affordable machines could outmaneuver billion-dollar defense systems. The drones didn't just strike, they humiliated. They exposed the vulnerabilities in a superpower's armor, the cracks that years of propaganda had tried to conceal. And as fires raged across military complexes, the realization spread like panic. The once untouchable heart of Russia was bleeding. Inside Moscow, chaos replaced control. Air raid sirens screamed through the capital, and videos began flooding social media, blinding flashes lighting up the skyline, smoke spiraling above once secure facilities. Civilians rushed into shelters. Officials scrambled for answers, and the Kremlin's communication channels fell into disarray. The drones had not only crippled infrastructure, they had shattered morale. Every second of confusion was a victory for Ukraine. Every unanswered alarm a symbol of crumbling dominance. It was psychological warfare at its peak, where fear and uncertainty became weapons as powerful as explosives. Behind every drone was a team of Ukrainian engineers, programmers, and soldiers who had refused to surrender to despair. They had turned civilian technology into instruments of defense, adapting commercial drones with advanced navigation systems and explosive payloads. Each success story was born from necessity, from a nation cornered yet unbroken. That night was not merely a mission, it was a culmination of resilience, intelligence, and national pride. It showed that innovation can level the playing field between the oppressed and the oppressor. When dawn broke, the smoke still hung over Moscow like a grim reminder. The damage was extensive, but the message was deeper. Ukraine had rewritten the rules of warfare, proving that courage and creativity could defeat superiority and arrogance. The 31 drones did not just cripple Moscow, they redefined what it means to fight for survival in the 21st century. They became a symbol of a nation's will to strike back, to adapt, and to rise from the ruins stronger than before. And though the world watched in shock, Ukraine understood something fundamental. That night in war, the quietest weapon can make the loudest statement. When the first explosion tore through Moscow's outskirts, the city that once believed itself untouchable was suddenly awake to a new reality. The rumble echoed through concrete towers and glass facades, shaking the illusion of safety that had lingered since the war began. For years, Moscow had been the symbol of power, control, and distance from the battlefield. Yet in that moment the lines blurred. The war it had sent beyond its borders had found its way home. The drones didn't just strike physical targets, they struck at the pride of a nation that had always thought of itself as the aggressor, never the victim. The attacks were timed with ruthless precision. As the city slept, Ukrainian drones homed in on strategic zones, fuel storage sites, command centers, and radar installations. The first wave struck an energy grid outside the capital, plunging sections of Moscow into darkness. Streetlights flickered out, alarms wailed, and communication lines snapped under the pressure of the chaos. Within minutes, panic rippled through the city. Residents flooded social media with videos of blazing infernos lighting up the skyline. The Russian propaganda machine tried to maintain calm, but the fear was spreading faster than the fires themselves. For the first time, the Russian people saw what it meant to live under the shadow of constant threat. Inside the Kremlin, confusion turned to disbelief. Commanders scrambled to identify the scope of the attack, but their own radar networks were partially blinded by the swarm. Each new explosion meant another system compromised, another defense line breached. The air defense systems, once boasted as the most advanced in the world, were firing chaotically, trying to hit targets that moved faster than they could calculate. Reports from the outskirts described a city on edge, filled with smoke, panic, and disbelief. In a few short hours, Moscow's sense of superiority evaporated. What had been a symbol of might now felt vulnerable, exposed, and fragile. The psychological impact was immense. Russia had built its identity around the narrative of invulnerability. Its people were taught to believe their homeland was shielded by layers of military strength, that no enemy could dare approach their capital. But that night, those myths collapsed in front of millions of watching eyes. The explosions weren't just destroying buildings, they were dismantling confidence. The same fear that Ukrainians had lived with for months was now creeping through the heart of Moscow. Every drone that passed overhead carried not only explosives but a message: no one is safe from the consequences of their own aggression. The attack revealed the limits of Russia's vast arsenal. Despite having the largest military in Europe, it had failed to protect its capital from small, inexpensive drones. The contrast was striking. Ukraine, a nation under siege, had outmaneuvered a global power using ingenuity instead of resources. It was a symbolic reversal of roles. The hunter had become the hunted. Russian officials tried to downplay the damage, labeling it as minor disruptions, but the visuals told a different story. Columns of smoke rising over military installations, emergency services stretched thin, and civilians watching helplessly as fire consumed the night. In living rooms across Russia, the illusion of distance from war was gone. Parents woke their children and rushed them to basements, unsure if more strikes were coming. For many, this was the first real encounter with the fear that Ukrainians had endured daily. It was a harsh awakening, a realization that war, once a distant spectacle broadcast from foreign soil, was now at their doorstep. The Kremlin's promise of safety had been shattered, and in its place stood silence, confusion, and a haunting question: if they could reach Moscow, where else could they strike next? By morning, as the fires still smoldered, the world watched footage of the capital that once symboled untouchable power, now scarred by destruction. It wasn't just infrastructure that had been crippled, it was pride. The attack had stripped away the image of strength that Russia had carefully constructed for decades. The message was clear and devastating: no fortress is impregnable, no empire invincible. Ukraine had turned fear into a weapon and used it with precision. The psychological shock would echo far longer than the sound of explosions, and the shadow it cast over Moscow would remind Russia that the war it started was no longer just abroad, it was home. The 3071 drone strike on Moscow was more than a military operation. It was a turning point in the evolution of warfare. It marked the moment when the battlefield shifted permanently from land and sea to the realm of algorithms, signals, and code. The future had arrived silently, carried by small machines that didn't need pilots, didn't tire, and didn't hesitate. Ukraine's strategy proved that modern war is no longer defined by the size of an army or the number of tanks it commands. but by its ability to adapt, innovate, and use technology as a force multiplier. The skies over Moscow that night became a laboratory for the next generation of conflict, one where artificial intelligence and precision engineering replaced traditional firepower. In past wars, power was measured by artillery and manpower, by how many missiles could be fired or how large a nation's navy was. But the drone assaults shattered that old equation. Ukraine showed that an organized network of small, autonomous drones could achieve what entire squadrons once did, at a fraction of the cost. The drones communicated in real time, adapting routes, changing altitude, and evading countermeasures with near-human decision-making. This wasn't just a coordinated strike, it was a demonstration of digital intelligence applied to combat. The battlefield was now a data field, and whoever mastered it would command the wars of the future. The message resonated far beyond Moscow. Military strategists across the world watched closely, realizing that the balance of power had shifted forever. Nations that once believed themselves safe behind billion-dollar defense systems suddenly saw their vulnerability exposed. Complex radar grids, surface-to-air missile networks, and heavily fortified bases could be neutralized by technology small enough to fit in a backpack and smart enough to outthink traditional defenses. The Ukrainian strike was a warning. The age of dominance through size was over. The new era belonged to those who could think faster, code smarter, and strike precisely. The psychological dimension of this shift was profound. Drones removed the human cost of combat for those deploying them, making warfare both more efficient and more detached. Operators could guide destruction from hundreds of miles away, their screens showing distant targets turning into smoke and flame. Yet behind every click was still a human intention, a decision to strike, to disrupt, to send a message. The combination of human resolve and machine execution created a new kind of soldier, one defined not by physical endurance but by digital skill. Ukraine's success proved that the courage to innovate can be just as powerful as the courage to fight on the front line. What unfolded that night was a glimpse into how conflicts will be fought in the coming decades. Swarm tactics, autonomous coordination, and precision targeting will replace mass offensives. Nations will invest less in traditional firepower and more in neural networks, artificial intelligence, and cyber integration. The line between military and civilian technology will blur further, as ordinary drones, satellites, and software become tools of defense and offense alike. The battlefield will extend into cyberspace, where hacking, jamming, and misinformation will be as lethal as missiles and bombs. The Ukrainian operation was a live demonstration of this hybrid future, a blend of physical and digital warfare perfectly executed. Yet the deeper significance lay in what it represented: defiance, adaptation, and survival. Ukraine, under relentless pressure, didn't just resist, it reinvented the rules of engagement. Each drone that struck Moscow carried not only explosives, but the proof that even under siege, innovation thrives. It showed that nations can no longer rely on outdated doctrines or sheer strength. They must evolve or be overtaken by those who do. The strike wasn't merely an act of war, it was a statement that intelligence, both human and artificial, had become the ultimate weapon. When the smoke cleared over Moscow, military analysts knew they had witnessed more than an attack. They had witnessed the dawn of a new warfare era, a conflict where speed, information, and precision outweigh numbers and brute force. Ukraine had not just struck a blow against Russia, it had redrawn the future of global defense strategy. In the quiet hum of those 3071 drones, the world heard the sound of transformation, the end of old wars, and the birth of something entirely new.